The Oceans of Mystery team will free-dive this next wreck as they search for ghost ships of Lake Erie. When they were studying the sonar image of this next target, the team saw a shape among the wreckage that raised expectations that this wreck could be the ship they've been looking for. The shape was that of a funnel, and a funnel suggests a steam-driven ship. Much of what the team knows about the steamer Niagara came from newspapers, insurance reports, and eyewitness accounts of the ship's last days. In early December 1899, Niagara steamed out of Parry Sound on Georgian Bay in Lake Huron with a cargo of shingles and lumber. She was bound for Buffalo, New York. 2 days later, December 6th, Lake Erie took a tantrum. The wind blew upwards of 100 kilometers an hour, and it was snowing hard. 2 other steamers, Orion and A.P. Wright, sighted Niagara 5 miles off Long Point at the east end of Lake Erie. That was her last sighting. What happened to Niagara after that, no one knows. Darkness shatters, and the wreck comes into view. Camera lights are bright and reveal a sizable portion of the wreck. The hull shape is that of a Great Lakes steam barge. Though the bridge is missing, probably ripped apart in a storm, it's not difficult to see its outline against the hull. There's a good chance this wreck is the ghost ship Niagara. The day after the storm of December 6, 1899, the air was thick with mist, the water flat calm. The steam freighter M.T. Green was sailing off Long Point when it passed through floating debris that turned out to be a load of new cut shingles. Niagara was carrying shingles when she sailed from Parry Sound for Buffalo. The sight of those shingles had those on board the M.T. Green concerned, especially the man who was keeping watch from the bridge. His name was Morrow. Scattered among the shingles, he saw a hull sheathing that was painted green. Green was the color of Niagara's hull. Morrow saw something else. An apparition, he said, the ghost of a woman who was standing on the water and waving as though she was waving goodbye. Then the woman disappeared or sank out of sight. The sailor swore that the woman he saw waving to him was Mrs. Annie Morrow, the stewardess on board the steam barge Niagara. There was no doubt in his mind. He knew the woman better than anyone because Mrs. Annie Morrow was his wife. That news made Niagara the talk of Lake Erie, because in those days people took such sightings and strange occurrences seriously. When Morrow told of seeing the spirit of his wife on the water, people believed him. 100 years ago, people believed in ghosts more than we do today. They believed the spirit survives the body, and that a troubled spirit is damned to suffer in the afterlife. This boiler is a sure sign this wreck was a Great Lakes steamer. So, is this single funnel. The crew of Niagara numbered 12. Captain Henry McClory made 13. Captain McClory left behind 4 children, wife. His wife had had a premonition of Niagara foundering in a storm. She had awakened the morning of December 7th and suddenly burst into tears. She'd had this overwhelming sense that her husband was no more. For the next few days, as the newspapers reported the various sightings of wreckage off Long Point, Mrs. McClory became more and more certain that her husband was dead. At the stern, there's a steam-driven winch, another clue that this wreck is Niagara. Of the 13 who went down with Niagara, only 2 bodies were ever found. Some bodies would have drifted and washed up on isolated sections of coastline. Others would have been trapped below. There's something eerie in knowing that somewhere in the belly of this wreck, under 100 years of sediment, there could be the bones of Mrs. Annie Morrow. Dave Gaudette swims the starboard side of the wreck in search of a distinguishing characteristic of the steam barge Niagara. There it is. That boat hook closely matches the one at the bow of Niagara. Steam barges like Niagara were once a common sight on Lake Erie. They were the commercial workhorses on the Great Lakes and through the Erie Canal. Steam barges and schooners marked the glory days for commerce and transportation on the Great Lakes. Discovering and exploring them is a way of preserving and learning about what once was. It's a way of touching the long ago, feeling into the lives of those who lived it. It's a way of appreciating how our ancestors sailed and worked on the water, the dangers they encountered, and the risks they took every day that they raised sail or fired a boiler. To leave a wreck undisturbed is to respect the past and what it has given us. It's also a way of nodding to the memory of those who sailed and are buried in a watery grave.